I'm going to pretend
You're right.
that there are a group of people on the other side.
You're right. So, oh, I don't even need to turn you around. So, sorry. I'm used to it because usually the camera. All right, excellent. You're still there. So, Oksana Marafioti. Is it how you pronounce?
Yes.
Well, just before we go any further, could you tell us, where you coming from, how you discovered your Romani identity, or whether you already came to this country with your identity in hand?
I grew up in Russia, primarily in Moscow. My grandparents from my father's side were very well-known performers, and they had their own Romani band, and they toured. So I grew up touring on buses and traveling all over the country on concert tours with my grandparents. And my father was one of the performers in the group too, and so when my mom married him, she became one of the performers. So it's like a whole family thing: aunts, uncles, grandparents, parents, me. And I did that with them until I was about 15, and then we moved to the United States, and everything changed after that. So actually, I had more of an identity of the Romani part of the family when I was back in Russia. And then once I came to America, I was 15, went to high school, and I became more American than anything else.
Wow. Interesting. What is your book about? I mean, honestly, none of us have read it, so we know it. We know it exists.
It's a strange book. It is about the traveling in Moscow or in Russia. It's a memoir about moving to America. When we moved, we moved to Hollywood, and I went to Hollywood High School, which is a very strange place to end up in as an immigrant. And it was kind of about trying to find the meaning of belonging. Like when you're very young, partially, especially when you're of mixed culture, you try to figure out where you belong, And it was kind of my journey trying to figure out who I was. Was I Romani? Was I Armenian? Was I American? And trying to find a way to bring together, I guess, the old traditions that I was a part of and the new life. And I mean, some stranger details were that. So my dad was a professional musician in Russia. My parents both were, but when they came to America, they ended up in Hollywood and realized everyone's a musician in Hollywood. And competition was very fierce. And my parents divorced, and my dad married a Romani woman from Russia who came to join him, and they opened a psychic shop, and he became an exorcist. So part of the book is dealing as a teenager with the fact that your father was an exorcist.
Interesting. So, did you find other Romani people other than your stepmother? Did this identity actually kind of bring you that sense of belonging that you're talking about?
No, I didn't know many people from any cultures. I mean, I speak Russian, and there were many Russians living in that area, but I intentionally separated myself as a teenager from all my cultures because, I made a decision that I needed to learn how to be an American first, and I kind of wanted to not be anything else for a while. And obviously, looking at it in retrospect, I realized that the older I got, the closer I became to my identity, to my cultural identity. So kind of went backwards a little bit.
To which of your many possible cultural identities?
Romani and Armenian. I mean, that's what I mostly identify with because those are the languages, although I don't speak Romani as well, or Romanes as well as I did before, I did speak those two languages. And so I identify with those closely.
So like when you lived in Los Angeles, like those huge Armenian neighborhoods, did you feel like you were at home? Was it?
No. But it wasn't because it was not home. It was because, again, I had a task. Mm-hmm. And I was very driven by the task of becoming an American. So I intentionally isolated myself from groups of Armenian or any Romani people that I knew. You know, I didn't have any friends in any of those communities because I wanted to learn what it felt like, you know, to be this new person.
All right. So basically, your recipe is more sort of along the lines of melting pot than multiculturalism that we're sort of trying to preach today, right?
Right.
Okay, so but you did discover some Romani people here, or you met some Romani. What is your impression of the Romani in America versus Romani in Russia? Because, for example, you know, I think, you know, I don't. It's debatable whether I have any Romani blood myself, but I think I knew about Romani performers like your parents from the very, very beginning of my life. You know, it was just part of. It was around. And the students in this class whom you don't see, but there's about 30 of them, and basically they first encountered this whole phenomenon in this class. And they never, you know, they were asked to conduct a survey standing at the street corner and ask strangers, what do you know about the Roma, you know, where are they from, you know, and nobody knows anything, nobody has seen anybody. So have you seen American Roma?
I have, and I've made quite a few friends of them. And I think the difference is that there is the Russian Romani that I knew, you know, it wasn't a matter of identifying with a heritage or pride in heritage. It's just what you were. You were Roma, or you were Russian, or you were Jewish, you know, and people went about their lives. And here, the Roma that I meet, you know, many of them, young or old, it really doesn't make any difference. They have more of a pride in their heritage. They know much more about the history. They actively participate in movements, you know, in writing and in kind of spreading more knowledge about the Romani culture. I mean, that's what I do as well. So that was the biggest difference. And I think it comes with culture that we live in here, you know.
So what about the opposite? What about the anti-Romani stereotypes? And maybe you can tell us the story of the big fat.
Yeah, that was a very strange occurrence, because when the producers reached out to me before the show even it was still in conception. I mean, the show was already going on in the UK, and they decided it was so successful, they decided to make an American version. And so when I went to see them in Los Angeles, I was under the impression that they wanted a reality show. And I should have known better, because I have a cinematography degree. I used to work in Hollywood and film, so I should have known better that reality didn't actually mean reality. And I thought that this would be a great opportunity to have the Romani that I knew here, you know, people who had regular jobs, families that they took care of, who had never lived in a caravan or on the street, who were never into fortune telling. I was under the impression that they wanted those kinds of people to be on the show, because that's the reality that most people don't know about our culture. So it was very surreal when the producer and I were sitting, and it started off very, you know, just small talk, and then I explained to him I was a college graduate and a professor, and I would love to be on the show. And he said, well, but do you know of any gypsy weddings? You know, like what people wear, traditional costumes? And at that point, I was like, okay, this is going to be a nightmare. So I already knew. And he's like, oh, how about somebody who plays violins? Like, I was like, well, I know a lot of people who play violins, like American violin players, you know, Japanese violin, Chinese, Romani. I mean, they're all, yeah, but that's not what he meant. So it wasn't really, he knew I wasn't for them, and I knew they weren't for me, I mean, at that point. And unfortunately, I was contacted actually by a few people who appeared on the show. Did you guys watch any of the episodes, by the way?
We had a presentation by some courageous students who brought some clips, and those were the first things that I've seen any of that. And I was absolutely, you know, what was I? Stunned, appalled, astonished. Basically, Say it again?
A WTF moment.
Yeah, that one. WTF moments,
Oh, yeah.
says Matthew. I mean, my working hypothesis is that the Roma have nothing to do with it. That it's about us, about the Gadget. We want to see we want to see dirt. We want to see kind of stupid, over-sexualized things, and then we can call it names, And to call it gypsy is kind of safe because who is going to? Well, you were the one who was supposed to defend.
Yeah, I tried. I mean, it happened more than once. But the funny thing, the reason I asked if anyone's watched the show was that some of the ladies that appeared in the show actually wrote to me because they read my article for that, and they said, "Look, they said that a whole bunch of stuff was taken out of context, and they didn't know what was going on. So they went on the show, and they didn't realize that the way that they were going to edit the show was going to show them in such a negative."
So basically, there are ethical questions in addition to everything. But
right.
I mean, whatever I saw didn't look particularly Romani. I mean, do they actually do they have the quote unquote real gypsies on their show?
Well, these ladies, and one of them, I think her name was Christina, and I think it was her and her sisters. So I don't know. It might have been that Gypsy Sisters spin-off or something. And she claims that she was Romani child, so like English, British, Roma, but American, obviously. But she said that she said that they were shocked and they asked the producers to change things, but they wouldn't change them. So she said that it was sensationalized without the actual participants' permission.
Yeah.
That's what she claimed.
Not surprising. All right, I think I will ask you my last question, and then I will ask the students to ask questions.
Okay.
So I am sure they already prepared about a ton of them. My last question is: you did that. It was pointless. You were bringing something real. They were interested in their ugly dreams, and that's kind of normal. That's what Hollywood is. We all understand. What are your further plans to popularize the idea to fight for fight against the stereotypes of the Romani people in this country or elsewhere?
Well, I'm always in the process of doing something in one shape or form. I mean, writing about it, obviously, and what I guess some people would say intellectual activism. I think it's a very big part of bringing about real change. So like when we think of activism, we think of ground movements. So like walking down the street, holding up signs, and that's one type of activism. Whereas intellectual activism involves writers and educators and students getting involved in understanding how stereotypes are expressed in literature and in scholarly discourse, and changing that, obviously, by bringing in more sophisticated examples. So that's I'm in the process, as I write, I'm preparing to present at a conference. I presented at Harvard a couple of years ago. Every time on this topic, that in literature and in writing and in classrooms, when we talk about Roma, we need to understand the contrast between a stereotype and a real person, and we need to bring this real person into the classroom, into the stories, into the books. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do, which to a lot of people seems very strange to me, because they're like, well, if you write about a Roma in a book as an ordinary person, then are they really Roma anymore? Which is a very strange question.
Very, very cool, very cool. We're actually going to discuss it today in an article by Dobriva about Kusturica and Tony Gatliff.
Right.
But let's just give a couple of minutes for the questions. So who has a question? Yes.
If you could have rewritten the show to what you had originally planned, what would the show look like?
That's a very good question. So I tried because I wanted to hear, because it's not very easy to hear from out there. I mean, it might sound kind of boring, but I would bring onto the show the Romani that you wouldn't expect. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys knew very much about what Roma was. I mean, most people conceive of it as a character, right? A caricature, either a fortune teller or a dancer or a thief. So I would bring in a Roma academic to talk about certain issues with how the community is with the stereotypes that are prescribed to the community. Or I would bring in a lawyer who happens to be a single mother, happens to be a Romani as well, and talk about her perspective of life. So I would bring in, I call it ordinariness, like ordinary characters, ordinary people. You know, this is how we start relating to cultures outside of ourselves, is when we begin to see them as ordinary, as opposed to these extraordinary characters that do these crazy things. So I would bring in ordinary people.
Cool. Total guaranteed fail in Hollywood.
You know, right? Again, I should have known.
Okay, next. Joseph.
How do you go about reconnecting to a culture that you almost try to cut off for so much of your life?
I'm sorry, can you repeat
How
that?
do you go around trying to reconnect to a culture that you were cut off from yourself for a number of years?
I don't think that's very hard, because the word reconnecting is imperative here. You're already connected to it. It doesn't matter how much you move away from your heritage, it's always a part of you. It remains so. So it's just a matter of choice, you know, and once I started writing my book, even before I decided to write it, I had to make the choice, you know, am I going to reconnect, and am I going to interview people from within my family and learn more about the heritage? And it was just a matter of decision. And obviously, as someone who's older, I had a very different perspective on how important that culture was to my identity. I mean, it was already part of it. I just hadn't recognized it before.
Excellent. Zach, any questions?
I guess in the concept of the American melting pot, many cultures, as the cultures start to become one, they bring unique aspects to the culture. Are there any seen specifically, because as people lead ordinary lives, are there any unique aspects that also stick out that people designate as Roma while leading a regular life?
You know, I don't think people within the culture really prescribe to themselves any characteristic that stand out. Usually it's the people from outside the culture who do that. But to me personally, what I would say, if I were to identify myself as a Romani, if somebody said, well, what does that, like, there's some Romani traits that you see in yourself that you would prescribe to that particular culture of yourself, I would say I don't give up very easily. I'm very stubborn. Creativity is very important in my life. But again, you can subscribe these to many other cultures too, right? So it's a matter of a personal perspective. I don't think there's such a thing as certain attributes being part of a certain culture. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Oksana, I just want to introduce you to a person whom you cannot see, but who is in this class, Kewin Ferren. It's a pen name. She is also a writer on Romani subject. We met many years ago. She came to my class and was basically auditing it. The first time I taught a class on Romani cultures. Since then, she published a book, probably working on the next one. Got a degree in Romani studies, you can say. And so perhaps Kewin could ask you something.
Hi.
Hi.
I do a lot of work in the public, with public schools here in Iowa, sometimes with different universities, and the question always comes up on that TV show. All of, everybody thinks it's real, and they're so disappointed when it's not. But, we have these horror stories of, people who do think it's real. I've had police responding negatively to assaults because, we've seen that show and we know what you people are about. I've had, one of my presentations was out in a public place, and I had a woman looking at my display, and then she came over and she said, I asked if she had any questions, and she said, well, I know all about you people, and, I think you're disgusting. and it was from the show. It was all about that show. And so my response, the work that I wind up doing is because of the show and its negative after effects. I feel like I'm picking up the pieces all the time. And it's in the circles that I've communicated in, there's always talk of, can Romani establish some sort of media network, some sort of anything that can get the word out there larger than what we've been doing? And do you think that there are any options for that?
Specifically about establishing a larger Romani network?
Yes.
With the social media platforms, the way everyone is accessible nowadays, I don't think that's really an issue anymore. I'm familiar with what you described in many ways. In fact, if you go on Amazon and read one of the original reviews of my book, it's a very long review, and it's actually not a review. It's a friend of mine's recollection of what happened at one of my earlier readings. And it's really funny to read, although the experience wasn't funny. I was doing a reading in Berkeley, I think, and in the middle of the reading, this woman stands up and she says, "I just want everyone to know the truth about gypsies. I'm a journalist from Romania," and I use the word gypsy because she used it. "I'm a journalist from Romania, and I just want everyone to know that they are a subhuman species who lie and steal and cheat and are genetically inclined to aggressive behavior." And she just went on and on and on. And people in the audience, it was a full house, and people in the audience were getting so upset that in the end the police had to be called over because people were going at it like to fight with her and her husband. And they just kept going. And they were looking at me, and I'm frozen in the front of this room thinking I'm going to get shot or something, like any minute now, right? And they're looking at me and asking me for help. So this woman across the sea of yelling, audience members is looking at me and saying, "Tell them it's true. Why aren't you telling them that it's true?" So it was a very surreal experience. So I've had quite a few of these, but what I've noticed is this. A lot of people who make these comments are of older generation, so my generation, older, not very many young people. It seems like younger people, like students, are becoming more informed, just in general, about many things. And I think that's where the secret lies, is that if we're able to connect with this younger generation of people, they are the ones who make the biggest difference. It's very difficult to change people of our age. It's very difficult to stand there and prove to someone my age who has seen the show that it might not be true because they've already had preconceived ideas and they don't understand the social market is not real. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does. I've just been a part of some movements, like American Gypsy came out on National Nat Geo Channel. Mm-hmm. And a group formed to try to get that shut down, or at least get into negotiations with it. And I've experienced so often with once you start getting different groups in and the agenda comes in, I've yet to be in an organization that manages, or a group of people that manages to stay on one track and work together without completely falling apart.
Right, and I've heard this before, and maybe I sound like an idealist. I don't think that's necessarily. That's because there's so much pressure, right? It's kind of disheartening when you don't see any progress. You don't see any real progress. You don't see a change, a big change that's noticeable. But I think we need to start on a smaller scale. So, it's about educating the young on all sides, so that then when they come into power and they start making things, whatever it is, government policies, shows, they're informed. It's all. I think it's all comes down to education, not necessarily to creating a movement and hoping that we're going to reach the entire world and everything's going to change in a day. Because there's just so much old belief systems that are still in place, very strong in place. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It makes lots of sense, of course. I mean,
Yes.
you're a great resource, Oksana. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us. And any more questions? That's it. Oh, there's another question.
What was it like to actually be a part of your family's performances in Russia? Like, what was that experience?
Well, it was very similar to living in America and you happen to be a child of rock star parents, and you're just like traveling with them. Everything's crazy. You don't really understand what's going on, but then you get to sit in the backstage and listen to some really great music. So that was definitely a really good part of it. And I actually tried to, 3 times I think, I ran onto the stage in the middle of the shows. Experience. My dad running around trying to catch me.
Sounds
Yeah.
great.
Priceless.
That's it. I mean, I meant to have it much shorter, but you're such a great storyteller that it's hard to stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we will be in touch.
Okay.
All right. Ciao.